All right, welcome folks to our April. Holy cow, it's April. April edition of our Family Life G Chat. We got a pretty awesome guest with us. I'll let Jennifer introduce him, but just remember, follow us on Facebook at James Island Family Life if you like what you hear today. You can also find us the same way on iTunes, so make sure you do that after the show. Jennifer.
Thanks, Andy. I want to introduce James Island Family Life to those of you that don't know. They're joining us for the first time. Our motto is, we do not have all the answers, but we're better together. So what we try to do is have a casual conversation with a guest or two on a particular subject matter. And today we're talking to Scott. He's been a guidance counselor for 10 years or so and has recently moved into administration. So he has a lot to say on our subject of kids and depression. And we're not just talking about teens and depression, we're talking about just kids in general, students of all ages. So it's not something that people talk a lot about, and I know that some of us parents probably wonder sometimes, do we take our kids seriously or think it's just a passing thing? And Scott has some real life experience with it, so he's going to help us out today. So our topic is sort of weighty, and with that in mind, we're going to try to be frank in our discussion so that we shed light, like I said before, but we also want to protect those folks that Scott has worked with in the past and the students that he loves so much. So we're going to be truthful and at the same time not share, of course, details that would cause emotional distress to anyone or violate the privacy of the families that Scott knows. So we're going to jump right in with that, and we try to keep these chats at a half hour, so we'll try to do that. It might go a little bit longer because Scott has a lot of insight into this. So Scott, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your career and why you got into this, what you love about it, and just start off like that, and then I'll have some questions for you, and Andy will too.
Okay. I think kind of like going into ministry, people say they're called. I've always felt, close to kids, caring about their concerns, their issues. I actually, when I was in high school, my sister came and lived back home with us, and my niece was born there while I was in high school, and so I had a lot of involvement with a small kid, then, and then when I was in college, I was, just kind of trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, but also loving spending time with her, and then it just kind of fell into place. I've always worked with kids in one way or another. I've worked at the high school level. I've worked for a nonprofit with K through 12. I've worked for over 10 years in the elementary setting, and I also worked 3 years at a college, on a college campus. So I really like to help people, and I think, it's always been a calling.
So have you always been in the guidance counseling field, or are there other aspects that you've worked in? Is it mostly counseling?
For the past 10 years, I've been a guidance counselor, and just recently moved into an administrative role. But I've worked in just a variety of areas within education and just working with kids. But with the guidance counseling thing, like I said, I did that for a decade, and I may still go back to that someday. I've enjoyed it, but after 10 years, sometimes you're ready for a change.
All right, looks like we might have lost Jennifer just for a few seconds. I think she'll probably jump back in a second. Why don't you tell us, Scott, in your experience, are there age limits to things like depression? Does depression have a tendency to onset at like a high school age? Because normally when you think of like adolescent depression and like issues like that, people automatically go to to older children, older adolescents rather than younger children. But do you see a definitive line there, or does it kind of cross over?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to what I know. And when I worked in the high school setting, that's where I saw it. And then when I worked in the college setting, at times that's where I saw it. And then, most of my experience has been at the elementary level, and I would say as students get older in the fourth, fifth grade, going into middle school years, and going through hormonal changes and that type of thing, I would say I see more issues with depression and similar diagnoses in the older elementary levels. But I was talking with Jennifer earlier. I've dealt with students who have had some pretty major depressive episodes and issues, down to 5 years old. I'd say starting at 5.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny because I mean, we have 4 kids, and my oldest is 9, almost 10. And it's crazy to think that that you, as somebody that's a professional in the in that industry and been around it, you say you've seen symptoms at a young age like that. For folks maybe that are watching and that kind of hits home for them as far as having a younger child that has those kind of onset symptoms of depression, let's say in elementary school. What are some of those signs to not necessarily be scared of, but just to watch out for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of a complex answer, and I'm not a depression expert, but I think some people may use the word depression lightly, but when you're working in a clinical setting, that word has very specific factors related to it. When you go and you talk about a diagnosis of depression or really any type of mental illness, oftentimes a therapist or psychologist or a family doctor, they'll use a checklist type system, and they'll look at within a diagnostic manual, and they'll see how many factors a child possesses or a person possesses, and then they make their determination from that. It's not always exact science. A lot of children and people may have more than one diagnosis, and so that's pretty common when you're dealing with depression. And I might have lost your question there a little bit, but
mainly just like what are some key specific things to watch out for?
Well, depending on the age, I think a lot of times when kids are younger, parents may say, well, they seem a little withdrawn, they seem down, they seem sad, and you may even see this in their words or how they play or their drawings or something like that. But he's a kid, go play, and you kind of brush it off. And I have 2 kids of my own, and I often do that because you don't want to call in the crisis team every time the toy breaks or something. So it's tough to figure out sometimes, is this normal or is this excessive? But I would say at times, as far as factors and things you might see, so being withdrawn, sometimes being angry. Kids oftentimes have an inability to focus. And you may see grades drop. You may see some academic issues, and so the tough part of that is that that's also, a lot of those are also factors for tons of other issues.
Now, do you see, and Jennifer, do we have you back yet? Sounds like we might be getting her back. Not 100% sure yet. Do you have I mean, is it normal for children, because I can't remember ever going to my guidance counselor, I mean in school, and is it normal for kids to be approachable to their guidance counselor? How much interaction do you have in maybe some of these listeners their children? I mean, is it enough to really get to know them, or is there something that parents should be doing to encourage their kids to maybe reach out to you or to others?
Mm-hmm. The first part of what you said I didn't catch. Did you say basically you never really went to your guidance counselor?
Yeah, I don't ever remember going to my guidance counselor.
Yeah, and I'll say, for me, I don't ever remember a guidance counselor until high school, maybe middle school, and they just did the same. And so I think that's, in some settings that's still similar. And again, I can only speak to what I know, but in the school setting that I'm in, it's really up to the guidance counselor. And, I don't want to be just the person that people come to when there's a problem. Um,
Right.
in the elementary school, every state's different, every school's different. But the guidance counselor, you're almost like a teacher, almost, in some ways similar to a related arts teacher, like if the kids go to music or art or PE. Less often, but they'll come to the guidance counselor for a class, and we cover and teach about different types of life skills, safety skills, internet safety, how to deal with emotions, problem solving, making friends. We have a curriculum. Most states have a guidance curriculum, and so you meet kids there, and you get to know them. But then, as the years go, as life continues to happen, and oftentimes tough things happen, then you might get letters from kids like, "Hey, could I please come and talk to you about this?" And also, as a guidance counselor, you have to get to know teachers, because sometimes teachers, they may not think something's a big deal, or if they don't have a relationship with you, they may not feel comfortable sending that child to you to talk. And so you really have to work on kind of having a comprehensive program where you get to know as many people as you can. You make a lot of connections, and where I work, we really have a family feel, and so that helps me do my job, so that when I do talk to a student, it's not so scary, because many times I've had parents who find out that I spoke with their student, and they have lots of questions. Well, why did you talk to him? What's the deal? Was something going wrong? And oftentimes, the guidance counselor is kind of like, well, they're that in-between person before a child's behaviors get them in the office.
Oh, wow.
And so if a child comes in, a lot of times I'll see, especially in the beginning of the year, kids who have some separation anxiety, very normal. They don't want to leave their parents, especially your younger children. And so it might start off getting to know them with that. And then in first grade, a pet dies. And then in second grade, something tragic like a school shooting happens, and then that scared them. And then, so over the years, you see kids under a lot of different circumstances, but I think of some of the families I've worked with and gotten to know, and when they're comfortable with you, they do lean on you more. So it's really it's up to the person in the school, but a guidance counselor is a good resource for teachers and parents and other people to utilize.
Yeah, that's good, and I think that's good for maybe some parents to hear. That may be a little weary of their kid going to talk to some other adult that they don't know. Well, maybe it's encouraging for them to maybe get to know who their kid's guidance counselor is, and encourage their student to interact with the guidance counselor on a more regular basis. So.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think a lot of parents may feel that the guidance counselor is a therapist, and that's not what's happening. I mean, I'm not doing one-on-one intensive therapy with a child. In that guidance counselor role, most of the time, my job was to try to get the child calmed down, or just to get through an issue, whether it was a friendship issue, something happened on the playground or on the bus that morning, to try to just use some problem-solving skills to get them calm and back to class. And if it's anything that was major, then we would, alert the parents and try to make them in for a chat. Cool.
I'm gonna, Jennifer, I'm gonna get you caught up. Hey, everyone watching, we all have struggles with the internet, so we lost Jennifer there for a little bit, but she seems to be back here and going. We basically talked a little bit about when's the earliest signs that Scott has seen. Some depression in some younger elementary age students, and it really doesn't have a boundary of age. It's just kind of watching out for some warning signs, some kids drawing back and being less interactive, and or maybe acting out in drawings or stuff that they're saying and stuff. And then just briefly talked about his role as a guidance counselor in the students' lives, and how he is interacting with them on a continual basis, and kind of his role for the students' lives that he's assigned to. So I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to kick it back to Jennifer. Jennifer, we got you?
Yes.
All right. Just kind of changing gears real quick, and then I'm going to kick it back to Jennifer. Scott, what I've never struggled with depression, and I've talked about this on other GChats before, and so it's hard for me to, and not just depression. I don't want to just label this as just to talk about depression, but I've had my own struggles, trust me, but never anything with like depression, anxiety, or kind of social interaction stuff. But I have 4 kids, and I can see kind of signs of some differences in them. And for me personally, I get kind of, if I can say, anxious about it because I don't know I don't understand it. So what can you say to maybe a parent like me that is trying to be the best parent they can, but maybe has no understanding of what their kid's mind is even going through?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, denial's the first step, Andy. I'm just teasing. It really, you mentioned different things like depression and anxiety, and those are really different things. And most of the time, when you look at an issue and you think, okay, what makes this a minor issue versus something that's a major concern? Doctors will often, and I'm not a doctor, but oftentimes they'll say, well, okay, this becomes a problem, or this maybe warrants a diagnosis when it gets in the way of your daily interaction. It gets in the way of your grades. It's really getting in the way of your relationships and that kind of thing. So if you have a child who, they never want to go play, they don't want to do anything, then you've got to figure out, okay, do they not want to go to this person's house because they have an issue with that person, or they just don't want to go anywhere? Do they just not have the energy? And oftentimes I would recommend to a family, first see if there's something medical. The child could have something going on where for whatever reason they're not comfortable and maybe they're having some issues. And so, oftentimes, and I work really closely with our school nurse on issues. And so oftentimes you kind of rule out the medical piece, and then after a while you may find out, okay, well, this is more of an emotional thing. And really, you just have to know your kid. And if you have questions, if you're like, gosh, with your wife, we're talking about this all the time, what should we do about it? Because with a lot of issues, not just depression, not just anxiety, which is huge in schools right now. Anxiety is one of the things I see most often, but that's a different subject. But oftentimes it's just, if you see that this is a pattern, you continue to have issues with it, I think it's good to just, in conversation, maybe just open it up to somebody at your church, or maybe if you have a family doctor you have a good relationship, or like a nurse practitioner, get their 2 cents on it just to get that opinion. And oftentimes I know from taking my own children to the doctor, they'll listen pretty objectively, and 9 times out of 10, it's okay, it's no big deal. But sometimes it is. I just think that you always kind of have to have your radar going just to see, just to stay in touch with what your kids are going through, how they're dealing with things. Because if you don't stay in touch, if you don't reflect on what they've told you and how they're behaving, you might miss something important.
Cool.
So Scott, I'm wondering what would be the difference between us diagnosing something like as parents, like saying, for instance, say their grandmother died or something like that, and or their best friend moved away, or something that feels like it would be easy to say, oh, that's the problem. Mm-hmm. Is that a good, healthy thing to do, or should we kind of immediately seek more of a professional, like a counselor or a doctor? I mean, how long do we go on just saying, well, their grandmother, they were really close to them, and their grandmother died 2 or 3 months ago, and is it a time issue that becomes, is it more of a symptom issue, like how deep it goes?
It's, in my opinion, it's really more of a symptom issue, because it would be great to say, oh, well, normally 2 weeks is the time span. And some people who are really, their specialty is, say, for example, grief work, and they're a grief therapist. They may give you a more specific example or timeline there. But, things that I've read, you can find some numbers sometimes, but it's really up to each situation. For example, if a child loses a grandparent, well, you're dealing with that issue, and you're working with that child about losing the grandparent, but you may not be aware of other things that come up. They may also be dealing with the loss of the grandparent from 2 years ago, and the pet, and then the person on the TV show that died, and all of a sudden, you may have a child who, okay, they seem sad, they seem kind of withdrawn, they weren't talking to me, but I found out, well, the child didn't want to talk to me because maybe it was my dad, you know, which would be devastating. But the child didn't want to talk to me. Let's say as the parent. Sorry, I'm getting that confused. But if I was the parent and that was my child, the child may not want to talk to me because they don't want to make me cry. They want to make me upset.
I understand.
And so it's hard to, you know, put things in a perfect box and say, okay, this is how it works and I've got it. But oftentimes what I've seen is when you deal with an issue where, say, for example, grief, and these are all huge topics that we're kind of compiling, but oftentimes out of grief comes some anxiety because kids, in the end, they become scared of, you know, their parents dying. Maybe it was a person down the street. They get scared about losing their parents, or they get scared of their own death, and they think about that. Now, they may not verbalize that for a very long time, but oftentimes when I've dealt with kids, you know, I remember there was a situation once where the parent had a minor fender bender, not a big deal. The parent couldn't figure out what was going on. And then one day the child, you know, she just disclosed that she was really afraid that her mom was going to die because she had been in a wreck, and what if she had died, and she didn't want to leave her mom's sight. So, I don't know.
Would you say that depression then is more of a symptom of other things? Sometimes it could be a symptom of grieving process or a symptom of fear.
It can. It definitely can. And again, I'm not a depression expert, but you know, depression itself, you know, there's different chemicals in the brain that, you know, that when they get low, other happy chemicals aren't released, and you know, then you just have that person in that constant low. So you know, therefore, medication is often prescribed, or you know, changes in lifestyle and that kind of thing. But depression itself, it can be kind of the result of some things that happen, but it's not always that way. And you know, and talking earlier about, I've seen kids who are 5 years old who have just been, you know, depressed, and you know, they're 5. Not that much has really happened yet, and they can't explain why they're so down, they're so angry, and so when you can't really find answers, and you know, a parent feels like they're at a loss. You know, when I'm at a loss about you know, shoulder pain, I can stretch it, I can ice it, I can, you know, WebMD it and Google it, and after a while, you know, I've got to reach out, and so I think just knowing who to reach out to. That's big for parents, and I say that as a parent because I have to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the percentage of kids that have like a chemical depression, which is real? You're right, and I didn't mean to overlook that. And the kids that have like symptom-based depression, like, is it kind of half and half, or?
I wish I had that number because that would be awesome. You know, on average, I think, you know, if you read, you're going to find out 1 to 2% of kids have you know, diagnosed depression. When I read statistics and numbers and things, I don't always trust those because things are sometimes over-reported, sometimes under-reported. I'll tell you from experience, my guess would be more of a, I would say a higher percentage of kids are dealing with just, you know,
like situational
type depression that would meet all those different factors from a DSM-5 diagnosis type thing. They would meet that, but it's because of something situational that happened. But you do have your, you know, your percent. I mean, because like, say for example, if I work in a school of 1,000 kids, you know, and 1 to 2% of, you know, those kids have this issue, then you know, you do the math. We're dealing with a handful of kids that I'm going to deal with more often than the rest of the population. But also, you know, for that handful of children, they may also be dealing with ADHD. They may also have some other issues. They could be bipolar. They could have oppositional defiant disorder. There's other labels and things that you could give them. And this is kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but a lot of the time, you know, kids won't get a diagnosis when they're young because doctors don't want to put that label on them. And sometimes, you know, parents are really afraid of that label, and I understand that. You know, I definitely understand that because you don't want, you know, someone to make such a decision or an evaluation of your child too quickly, because oftentimes, you know, parents are afraid of, okay, if this is assigned to my child, you know, do they have this forever? And does this go on their record, and is it in their files? And I understand that, but at the same time, you can't, as a parent and not as a therapist, you can't get so caught up on, I don't want my child to have the label, so therefore I'm going to do nothing about it. Because when we deal with true depression, especially as the students get older, I've dealt with some situations that are very heartbreaking where students have attempted suicide, and that's a really tough thing. Luckily, I've never had one, but I know for colleagues who work at the high school level, they have had to deal with that, and that's a very difficult thing to deal with in a school setting and in any setting.
Do you feel like most of the time in the cases that you have, the families that you've walked through that with, have there been signs? Do you feel like there have been signs? I'm just trying to get at whether or not we as parents, what things we take seriously, what sort of signs do we put together? Do things just happen all of a sudden, or is it when you look back you see some things and you could have read it differently? Is there any way we could help anyone who right now is maybe thinking, kind of putting two and two together about some stuff that's happening in their home, and maybe you suggest, hey, just what maybe would be their first step, and what would that family maybe look like? The progression.
I think as someone who works with families, a listening ear is what you want first, to hear what they're talking about, what kind of issues they're coming to you with, and they're not coming to you with. If you see that the child's always upset or angry or seems to be fighting with the parent, yet the parent's always wanting to talk about something different, you don't want to get in someone's business, but just kind of asking some minimal questions about what's going on with the child, just out of care, and then you find out, oh well, she's or he's always upset about this or whatever, and then you look for patterns. You look for, okay, how long is this happening? Frequency of complaints or whatever's happening, because when you're dealing with kids, normally you wouldn't say someone's depressed because of one day they decide to skip school. It's not a boom, this happened once and then you're depressed most of the time, unless it's something pretty major. But I'll tell you, something that I've had just episodes where we've dealt with it pretty often, and then it seems to kind of, I don't know, we don't have to deal with it as frequently, is our upper elementary kids with cutting.
Upper elementary?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I've dealt with 5th grade, 4th grade, kids who cut before, self-injury type behaviors, other than just cutting, and that when you're able to find out about that, then that opens the door to some conversations of sometimes some really, really sad things, and I've dealt with high school kids who cut before, and some of them just acted as if it was a trendy kind of thing to do. They were just experimental, but that gets my advice, and if as a parent and someone else's, if I was dealing with someone who was cutting or making self-injury, wanting to hurt themselves, kill themselves type statements, I would certainly reach out and get some professional help about that.
Do you think there are usually statements? Do they usually say things they want you to hear, or do they leave things around they want you to see? Normally, are there any normal things to it, or is it very unique?
That would make it, easy, and sometimes yes, but not always. I'm going to think about it. Just thinking about a couple of kids. I've had kids before who, they show their classmates, look what I did, and they show them where they've cut. And there isn't a attention-seeking part of that, and I've had to talk to parents before who they were angry that the child was acting out that way and cutting themselves to get attention, and they were angry at the child. Why would they do that? And then I try to help them understand, if the child's doing that to get attention, then they really need some attention. And what is it within them that makes them feel like they need that attention? What's making them go to that extreme? And some kids, they may do some minor cutting, and that's as far as it goes, and they stop. But you have some who they get they get pretty tricky with it, and they hide it. They don't want the attention. They just want the they consider it a release, and they want the pain to go away. And then and it's hard to talk about these things without seeing specific kids in your head. But some do it and they hide it. You know, they won't cut on their arms. They'll do it in other places where it's hidden and no one can see. And so it's hard to find out. To answer your question, it's hard to know always what's going on with the child. You have to stay involved. You have to keep your listening ears on. You know, today we are very much inundated with, you know, phones and computers and tablets and things. And, you know, I love the early Saturday morning babysitter known as television because that allows me to sleep in a little. But sometimes we do that too often. And if you just go, you know, you go and you sit in a coffee shop or a restaurant, you see how many people are tuned into devices or television or things other than their children, and the children other than the parents. And, you know, there's a lot of communication there that it's just not happening. And so you're missing a lot of signs that normally, you know, you would want to see.
It's interesting that you say that. It's interesting that you said that, you know, when a kid is, and I'm backtracking a little bit here, but it just kind of stuck out to me. You know, when a kid is doing stuff to get attention, you know, when I've even been guilty of saying that before. Oh, you know, honey, don't worry about that. He's just doing that, or she's just doing that to get attention. You know, and we just kind of brush over that statement and not deal with an issue when you're saying there usually is an issue behind that, and it's kind of obvious now that I think about it. Well, if they're trying to get attention, why are they trying to get attention? Let's try to figure out the need behind the cause or the action that he's doing. So that's good for me to hear personally. So I appreciate that. You know,
when I first started working in the guidance counselor role, I remember a young man that I felt that way about, and I thought, he's just a clown. I mean, he was always getting in trouble, and he was just doing things to get under the teacher's skin. And, you know, I thought, well, he thinks this is funny, and he's trying to be the class clown, and I thought I had it all figured out. And so he was in the office pretty often. A lot of schools have a kind of like a vault, you know, like a heavy door where they, you know, have records and that kind of thing. And he spent his time in the office. He knew that office pretty well. And he's a child that, because of a lot of behaviors, he was referred to a therapist. And he worked with the therapist. And, you know, confidentiality is always a concern. And, you know, the therapist would only share specific things. But then one day, just out of the blue, the child threatened his life at school. And, you know, at first I thought, there he goes again. You know, and again, this was probably one of my first years in the role, and I thought, there he goes again. You know, let's see what he's up to now. And in talking with him, I found out that he had been cutting himself, and so I thought, okay, definitely going to let the parents know about this. And he wanted me to. He said, yeah, please, you know, that's fine. But after the therapist got involved, and she spent a lot of time talking with this child, and you know, in a different setting, she found out that he had been cutting himself all over, and he described later to us how he had tried to take his own life, and the things that this child had tried, the things he had done, and I felt so guilty because I had always just seen him as a behavior problem. You know, he irritated me, he irritated, you know, everybody, and so I missed the boat on that one. You know, I really did, and I'm glad that we got him the help that he needed. But this child, you know, he, like I said, he really tried to hurt himself in several different ways. He did try to hang himself, and he told me once how he tried to slam his head in a heavy door, and he compared it to the vault door in the office. He tried to take his life that way. And, you know, right now, you know, schools are on spring break, a lot of schools, and over the past, you know, 10 years, I've had 3 kids who have told me that while on family vacations or at times when they're at home and parents aren't around, they've tried to take their lives. And so spring break, that's I don't know, you know, that should be a fun time, but that is sometimes a scary time because for whatever reason, things that have been building up, those kids, when they feel like they have a chance to act on something, they have. And this doesn't happen all the time, and, you know, I don't hear these kinds of stories all the time, but when you do hear these stories and you do deal with a child that has tried to hurt themselves, tried to take their life, it definitely sticks with you. It definitely does. And so from that, I learned the lesson of, man, I oftentimes it's they're just goofing around, but I've learned that I can't always turn a blind eye to things because sometimes there's a lot more there than you would think there is.
So I hear you saying over and over and over again, the key is communication.
Right.
It's talking. Not only, on the front lines would be the parents, but then after that, definitely school counselors, doctors, just allowing them a place to open up.
Right.
And I also hear you saying to try really hard not to be quick to judge, not to be quick to put them in a box of it's just acting out or it's just getting attention or it's just for this one reason, like they're sad over this loss, or just to be really careful about putting them in a box and leaving it there instead of going back and checking with them and again communicating, which can be hard for parents, and especially I love how you pointed out this age that we live in because huge problem. Everybody's connected and not listening to each other often. So we need to stay open and connected. The child you were describing was elementary level or middle school? What level was that?
Yeah, that was an elementary level child.
Elementary.
Mm-hmm.
What is the youngest that you've seen, like a plan in someone's head to hurt themselves?
A plan can be specific, or it can be, very, very vague. Most of the time, I'd say that the earliest that I have been really concerned, I had a third grader once that I was pretty scared because he had the plan, it was detailed, and he talked about it often, how he wanted to act on it. But I have dealt with 5-year-olds who have given plans because you don't lead a child into what they should say, but on more than one occasion, a teacher has come to me and said, this child is drawing pictures of him dying, of him hurting himself, and or saying things, and I'm scared. I don't know what this means. What should I do with this? And when I've talked to the child, you have a lot of schools have an assessment type protocol they follow. And a lot of mental health providers, and talking with kids, and with a 5-year-old on more than one occasion, the kids have had some pretty detailed plans. Oftentimes, they're 5. We don't think you could actually follow through with it. But I have had 5-year-olds who have had pretty, I don't know, trying to think of the word, but plans that they could follow through on if they wanted. Now, if a child says, I'm going to get up in an airplane and jump out, but I've had kids who have talked about, specific details of the grocery store that their mom goes to, and when she is not looking and she's going to put the sibling in the car, they're just going to walk out in front of another car. Or they're going to do that at the daycare or this other place where a parent works that's close to the road. And, it's hard not to react, but to sit quietly and listen and let that child get that thought out. But I've had kids who have, it's really starting at 5 years old, who have had plans.
Do they bounce back from that? Like, when you have a kid that young making that bold of plans and statements, is that something that is kind of a telltale sign that that's something they're going to struggle with their entire life, or can it be corrected with counseling? And I'm sure it can to a degree.
Right.
But is that just a telltale sign of kind of how their mind works and kind of things that they may kind of struggle with their entire life?
Mm-hmm. Again, that's situational. They can bounce back, because a lot of mental illnesses, including depression, are genetic. But it really depends on the reaction. The reaction from everybody involved, but especially the parents. If there's no reaction, if there's no help and follow through and follow up, nothing's going to change. Or if the child is told, don't say that, that's not okay, and it's just brushed away, there's no reason for that to get better.
Scott, I think we've talked a lot today about the realities, like the real picture of what it feels like out there in the schools and what kids are capable of thinking of and feeling like at the younger ages, which I had no idea that in elementary school kids were struggling like that. And you're talking about 8, 9, 10-year-olds cutting. I never would have thought that. And so we've talked a lot about that and who they should see, which would be obviously first with parents, then a school counselor, someone in the medical profession. Is there anything that you want to leave with us as far as encouragement as parents? Is there any practical advice you can give us if we start being concerned? Maybe we feel like maybe our communication lines are not open. How can we make that happen? And maybe our child's so used to us not listening, they don't automatically, they're just not going to sit down probably and bare their souls. Do you have anything practical and positive to leave us with to think on and act on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are practical things that can be done. Earlier you said that I've commented several times about communication, and I can't emphasize that enough. For parents to know what's going on with their kid, their middle schooler, their teen, and to just give kids opportunities to talk to them. Oftentimes, I hear kids say, well, my mom's too busy, she won't listen. And I'm guilty of that. I get really, really busy and caught up, and I cut my kid off and say, wait till we get here, let's do this. And you never know what you're stopping. Now, sometimes it could be just, they want to tell you about that movie they saw, or, but it's important to them. And so trying to make time in that busy schedule to listen and to see what's going on. And sometimes it may be, they may have nothing, but when they do have something, you want to create an environment where that child is comfortable talking. And sometimes that child may not be comfortable talking to you. I know growing up, I didn't want to tell my parents much. I had a cousin, an older cousin that I would talk to, and maybe an aunt. Help kids find that person. Who's that support network for that student? Is it somebody at church? Is it a neighbor? Is it somebody that you trust, who and not somebody that always betrays the child's confidentiality, but a child or a person that the child can talk to, but that if it's something really serious, they're gonna let me know, because that's the thing. As a guidance counselor, kids know I can't say anything. I'm not going to tell unless it's really serious, and that gives them an opportunity to get things off their chest.
I got to tell you, I didn't realize how valuable your role was at school. I just didn't know that when my kids were in elementary school. I did not look at the guidance counselor as my, what you call it, like someone who was necessarily on my side or even thought the same way that I thought. But after listening to you today, I have a whole lot more understanding of the love that you offer those families and really the ministry that you do right there at school. It's a resource I should have taken more advantage of. So I'll be sure to be the mouthpiece for you with people I talk to about your role. I'm glad to be enlightened on that. I bet you are too, Andy, because your kids are still young enough to take more advantage of the elementary counselors in middle school. My kiddos are in high school now, so.
Yeah, I know. I think you missed it earlier when you got disconnected for a couple minutes, but that was one of the first things I said. I was like, I don't even remember going to my guidance counselor, So this has been huge for me, just knowing as a parent, that they have somebody that is there for the sole purpose of, trying to be someone that student can go to and feel comfortable to sound off to. And I mean, I know me, I'm a youth pastor, so I encourage parents all the time to allow their students to do that stuff, but I've never thought in my head there's somebody besides their teachers at their school that they may feel comfortable doing that. That's huge.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Scott. We really appreciate just your time today and all the wisdom that you bring to the subject from your experience and the advice and everything, and just being really honest and straightforward with us. It helps us get a bigger picture of what all of our kids are dealing with. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Andy, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, folks, this is, I mean, if you sat through this the whole way through, the valuable information that Scott had, for us, and we definitely don't want to keep this, to ourselves. So that's why we've created kind of this online community of folks, not just folks with small children, and we've had discussions about trying to quit smoking cigarettes and adult couples without kids and their role in the family. And so if this is something you found valuable, I encourage you to go on Facebook and search for the group James Allen Family Life. You don't have to be a part of our church or a part of our community there. We've got people all around the world that are continuing conversations throughout the week. We do one of these podcasts, video podcasts, every month. It is always posted on our James Allen Facebook page. The link is on the first Thursday of every month, and you'll always find it there. We also do 5-minute podcasts every 2 weeks. So just a quick shot. If you got a busy life, you can spare 5 minutes and listen to an audio podcast on different topics, and I encourage you to do that. And then if you're an iTunes subscriber, you can go to iTunes and search the same thing, James Allen Family Life, and click subscribe, and they'll get automatically sent to your phone or device. So appreciate it. We love you guys, and remember, at James Allen Family Life, we don't claim to have all the answers, but we know that we are better together. So let's keep this conversation going on. Thank you guys. Love y'all.